Guys.
Your name again?
Eva.
Eva.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's recording.
Okay.
These are recording. You approve of us recording?
Absolutely.
Will be Spotify, YouTube,
Okay.
Facebook, Instagram, the Twitter, wherever Tom puts us. He's the IT guy.
Yeah, wherever
Okay.
I decide to put us.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you can go. Does she have a card? Did you get a card?
I don't have a card.
You
Okay.
can go to that website and just shoot him some deets if you'd like. Like,
Okay.
hey,
There's a
let me
message
know when
tab
you're
on
dropping
there.
this
Just
stuff.
shoot me a message.
Okay, so we can avoid questions. We can cut questions. We can do whatever you want. What did he say earlier?
Just ask.
Oh, it wasn't
He's
him.
probate, so they have a lot of weird rules about. It's like he's running under a political party, but a lot of the stuff that they do can't be political. Like they can't hold literature. They
Yeah,
can't
the
ask.
position shouldn't be
It
political.
shouldn't. It really shouldn't.
It's crazy.
insane that
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
running for judge, but whatever.
Yeah.
Like,
What kind of judge do you
Yeah,
want?
like what?
But so, in similar fashion, we asked him questions. He can answer freely, or he can not answer. That's fine. We get it. You're in a weird spot.
I'm fair game. This
Okay.
is a legislative seat, so it's all about opinions.
Okay.
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 So you're running for state senate.
I'm running for state senate.
Are you Democrat or Republican
I'm
or independent?
I'm hopefully gonna be endorsed. Hopefully by the Independent Party. I applied for endorsement through their questionnaire about a week ago,
Okay.
and I hope to hear very soon. And then I'm endorsed by a third party, WFP, and I'm also endorsed by the Democratic Party.
Okay.
Wow. Okay.
That's a lot.
So they take you pretty seriously.
I take myself seriously. How about that?
That's
That
good.
helps.
That's good.
I'm going to ask the question that nobody's allowed to ask, but you look very youthful. How old are you?
I get that asked very, very often. I look very youthful, thank you. Black don't crack. I'm 35.
Are you
35,
really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And you are correct. I don't know why black ages so
I
well.
don't know why.
It is.
I can't tell you the secret sauce because I don't know. Genetics is funny.
Yeah. Right?
I'll tell you what doesn't. White.
Oh
White
God.
ages poorly.
Yes. Look at us.
I'll give you the moisturizer,
We're
you know,
19.
Crisco, I don't know. People think I'm 19, 20 at the doors.
Absolutely.
And they're like, you have so much pizzazz. Good for you. And I'm like, I've been in my career for 16 years. Thank you.
Oh, that's great.
So what other seats have you held?
So I was on council for years. I lived in Newtown. I held the seat in Newtown, unfortunately, right after the tragedy, the Sandy Hook tragedy. And I recently, I guess more recently, I ran against Susan Beisowitz for lieutenant governor. Obviously, she won, but I did get 40%.
Okay.
Wow, okay. That's nothing.
Worked my butt off
Yeah.
because she's like a 30-year veteran.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So clearly we're here with Second Armament, which they're a Pro 2A clothing company.
Yep.
What's your view on
Pro all the way.
Oh, okay.
Pro all the
Okay.
way. Live in a gun-owning household. I think I don't want to frame it in a way that seems inappropriate, but don't take my guns away from me. Like,
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
that's like where I stand on that.
Sure.
You know, if we lived in a society where someone said no one has guns, no one has access to guns, I think it really goes against our principles and the foundations of why our founding fathers created us. You know, my dad was in the military. This is a conversation that I had as a little child, and I think having the opportunity to have that conversation for futures to come, I think it's a good conversation.
No, it's an important conversation.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. Fantastic.
Yeah, I don't think there's really a conversation that, especially in your field, that should be off limits. It's difficult. Some of them are going to be very difficult to talk about.
Well, I
but those
hate, like,
become more important, right?
I think the conflating of safety and Second Amendment is getting way too polarized here. There's a very big difference. I'm someone who lived in Sandy Hook for 10 years. I was there. I have friends who lost their kids. You know, no one's saying that what happens in massacres or the tragedies that are happening should happen. Obviously, like if you're pro that, then something's definitely wrong with
Right,
it.
right,
Kids
right.
should be safe. You know, so gun laws that tells me in my house that I have to make sure I have my gun stored away safely. Yeah, sure. Let's have those conversations.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with that. But to the point that you're trying to force policy when someone wants to be able to own a gun and that's where I draw the line. So I'm not, even though I'm endorsed by the Democratic Party and I identify with Democratic values are not all encompassing with just one line.
Right.
It's having the real conversation about what's the impact on society.
Okay. So we're gonna just jump topic to topic. So we prepared 4 sets of questions for today, well, for this weekend. So I'm going to pull from some of those, which at no point was I like, oh, what if we run into a politician?
Yeah, I
never crossed my mind.
Never mind 2 in the same day.
Yeah.
Goshen Fair,
Right.
only here.
The world famous Goshen Fair. So one of the questions that we've been asking is, should a woman have the sole right to choose what happens to a baby inside?
Oh, interesting question. I think absolutely.
Okay.
So I've never been in a situation where I had to make that decision. As I said, I'm 35 and talking about, what does family planning look like? But what I will tell you and share personally is if I had that scenario where, I had to choose between, or tell my partner to choose between my life and the baby's life, especially so early on, then I want to make sure that you have ample opportunity to save both lives or save my life. I think the woman should have the ability to figure out what she wants and what's safe and what makes sense for her and her family.
Okay. So again, some of these are going to be a little touchy. Do you think that the man, the father of the child, should have any say in the child's?
Oh, that's a harder one.
Yeah.
That's a really hard question. Because you're going into, I know people and I have friends who have decided to abort, just to say the word, to abort,
Yep.
and didn't discuss it with
Really?
potential dad.
Ooh.
Didn't discuss
Not
it.
even like a conversation.
And, I don't know if it's the Latina Catholic bred in me that doesn't sit right, but
Yeah, it should at least be brought
have a
up.
conversation. I don't know. Yeah. At the end of the day, I do believe that when it comes to decisions of the body, it should be the woman who decides, how it's going to affect her.
Sure.
But having the conversation with potential dad, potential partner, there should be a conversation. I out of ethics, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I'm trying to think. We had. Okay. And this one, I don't think that this is. I've never seen this publicly discussed, and I have been bringing it up. We have been bringing it up. Should we, with children, all children, should we start doing mental health wellness checks, kind of like with the school therapist or in a therapy setting, school counselor, when they're young, and do them annually, just like an annual physical?
Oh, I'm 100% in favor of that.
Right, and just track it, just like we track physical health. And if there's changes that maybe there's a trend, like, hey, when we see these changes, we know that this person is more likely to suffer from this or end up committing this type of crime when they're an adult. Maybe we could start finding solutions to those problems.
So I work in early education advocacy, and part of my role in that, I serve on a steering committee of an organization that just started this year in Connecticut called CSTAR, and it's for adverse effects of trauma affecting children and how those traumas later on can then lead to, heart conditions, obesity, and just a whole slew of long-term
And these
effects.
are emotional traumas?
Emotional
That lead to
traumas.
physical
Yeah.
problems.
Yeah, so scientists have actually studied kids, and they've done social and behavioral studies that if you have adverse trauma from, something so simple as your parents getting divorced to real trauma of a kid being sexually abused as a child, and how it leads to different changes health-wise as an adult,
Sure.
that it's connected, that you can't disconnect that trauma that's happening to the person from what's happening in their health later on. So these are, I'm not a scientist, I'm someone who works as an advocate, I work representing early educators, but the science is there and that connection is real. And one of the things in CSTAR, what we're trying to promote is screenings, yearly screenings, to see if kids are going through trauma
That's
and
what I'm talking
the
about.
impact on their households.
Yes.
And we're trying to, pass legislation to say this should be a thing. This should be a thing in schools. It should be a thing with doctors to say, hey, I understand that your kid, might have this health problem, but what's happening at home and start those conversations so that there's no stigma.
Actually, I've never thought of this, though I am very passionate about the Columbine thing. And if this had happened for Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, Columbine could have been prevented.
Yeah.
I never really considered that. Maybe that's why.
Well, I bet there's a lot of them that could have been prevented.
Absolutely, Adam Lanza certainly
Lanza.
could have been prevented. Yeah.
My neighbors went to school with Adam Lanza from childhood all the way through high school.
Oh, really?
And the conversations with Jess and her sister, it's like, how was he as a kid? And they're like, he was a kid who was, not interacting with us. He was
Like
a
a
kid.
therapist would have picked this up.
They would have picked it up, and they did. In the report, they did. Multiple times they did, but unfortunately, nothing was really done. The mom wasn't an advocate for that.
If that was a broken arm, for example, and they said, hey, your son has a broken arm, and the mom said, I don't want to do anything about it, they'd go, well, that's not really an option, sorry. And maybe that's how mental illness should be treated. You don't really have an option. We need to work to fix this.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, my whole world, and like many others, completely shifted because of Columbine. I was going into high school, and then overnight it went from normal high school experience to then screenings and gun checks.
Crazy.
And I'm like, what's happening here? Now I grew up in Hartford, born and raised in Hartford. I've now officially lived, everywhere else much longer than there. But in Hartford at that time, gun violence and drug abuse were prevalent. It was everywhere.
Sure.
So for overnight, one scenario of two kids who did a really horrible thing to change my reality, when people aren't even paying attention to some of the kids who are going through like a crack cocaine household, it's almost insulting. I had my happy family, my dad was a teacher, middle class reality, but unfortunately some of my classmates weren't living that reality and didn't have any of those social safety nets. So then you upheaval everything. It makes no sense.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, let's start at the source, people.
You went to public school in Hartford?
Public school in Hartford High.
Ooh. Okay. What was that like?
Hartford High was better than Quirk Middle. The middle school in Hartford was at that time, Quirk Middle was the biggest middle school in the whole nation. Had 3,000 students, 2 grades.
Really?
3,000 students, 2 grades. I had about 12 friends who were pregnant in middle school. It was crazy. Wow. At that time, Hartford Public lost its accreditation. By the time I got to graduate, they got their accreditation back. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
Kids didn't have things. People talk about, how bad Hartford was, but I don't think they really understand. And it's come a long way. And unfortunately now, the conversation about education, mental health, and resources, as much as I love my Hartford pride, they forget about towns like Torrington. They forget about towns like Danbury. They forget about towns, there's all these other
weird
towns.
Mid-size
That don't get the same resources. They don't get the same attention. They're like, well, those problems that are happening about drug and drug abuse, that's only big city problems. That's not the reality.
Right.
So let's have the conversation for all the kids in our state.
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody with $20 could end up with a drug problem.
Yeah. Absolutely.
We were just talking about this with the judge.
Yep.
So we were talking about the Torrington school system. So Pat brought up that I'm very against the new high school they're building, mainly because it's going to raise taxes.
It's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money, and my problem with it is the Board of Ed they're not funneling money into the schools themselves to get better classrooms, better teachers, better resources for the kids. They want to build them something new and shiny, but that doesn't fix your fundamentals.
The classroom experience.
Yeah,
So
curriculum.
my wife is a PCB. I actually worked.
Yeah.
She subcontracted through a different company. She
Not
worked
an easy job. My mom does that. She's gonna retire soon.
Yeah, my wife loves it. I'm happy. There's no way I could do anything with kids. It would drive me nuts. But my problem. So Torrington outplaces 100 kids per year because of mainly behavioral things. So whether they're autistic or they have just bad
Whatever
behavior.
developmental needs, ADHD, ADD.
Yeah, and instead of investing in that sort of thing, they're building a new school. And from what I understand, it costs $100,000 per student to outplace them because we cover, the town covers the transportation, the schooling, and all that for them to go to that special school. So we're going to spend $10 million a year on outsourcing these kids instead of spending $5 $5 million a year to put in the things that they need to learn appropriately within our school system.
So I recently met with TAFA, an autism group in Torrington, and they were telling me that rather than outsourcing developmental needs or non-neurotypical children, why not create a hub and support that system? I'll use the example of Newtown because I lived there and I was on council there. But in Newtown, you have all these resources for special needs children or developmentally needed children, and it's one of the top leaders in the state of Connecticut. So people come there for services and they pay in.
Sure.
So why not, Torrington be a hub for
Absolutely.
those specialized teachers to make sure that they reinforce the resources nearby, because you don't have much going on there. Like, you can't ship out kids to Waterbury. It's just, it doesn't really, well, you're doing it, but it doesn't really make sense. It doesn't make sense.
So that was the idea behind East School. My sister went to East School. She had cerebral palsy, and this was back in the 90s. But that was the design behind East School. That's what it was supposed to be, a hub where they focused on developmental needs students, and then they integrated regular population kids. And then that school closed. Didn't really close, but the Ed Advance took it over through a lawsuit or something that happened because they weren't meeting the criteria that they were supposed to be meeting. So they already tried that and it didn't work in Torrington.
Revamp it, do things differently.
Try again, do it right.
Yeah, I mean, the problem, like again, I don't go to Board of Ed meetings. These are things that I just know, and I don't know what's happening behind the scenes. Like, I had no idea that they talked about that.
They did. So, I work in education, so policy is my thing.
Yeah.
Behind the scenes, there is this desire to create services locally, and if given the opportunity to represent Torrington, then that's going to be one of my first priorities. Like, really changing how we do our funding structure locally, because again, too often we get forgotten. Little towns, mid-sized towns, they think that everything's fine, and it's not the reality.
Well, especially
they look at test scores, but test scores are only they're what you want it to be. If you're outsourcing or you're pushing people out of the system, then yeah, your test scores could look better. But why not bring people in and say, hey, we've got the resources here. Why don't you pay us money? You can have Litchfield, you can have all these other towns, Goshen, all these other smaller towns that need resources. Torrington could be that hub.
Yeah, exactly. I like it.
You mentioned policy and being in the position that you're running for. When you get elected to that position, what change do you want to affect first? Like, what's top priority? Top priority,
health and education. Those are my top two priorities. Health, because they're closing ER. Well, they're closing the maternity ward that then leads to closing ER ward in Sharon Hospital, and that's in the district. A lot of people need that. Even people from New York come down, and that's heartbreaking. Where do you go? You can't force so many people, thousands of people, to drive an hour and a half away when they need resources right then and there. So that really annoys me. I think people are up in arms about it, and nothing's being done. And our school systems here, we have the merger in Litchfield happening, Wamogo. There's a lot of regionalization. I just want to make sure that the funding comes here. Kids are not forgotten, that we have mental health, as I mentioned, C-STAR and ACEs, that resiliency training, and the capturing of what's happening in trauma, I think is really important, especially with COVID, to prevent disasters in the future. We have to do preventative care now. So those are my top two.
And your election is November 8th?
That's correct.
Okay, so all of the local elections are November 8th.
That's correct.
There are 2 seats for Senate in Torrington, right?
Yeah, there's the 8th district and the 30th, and it's split right down the middle, basically downtown being like the line.
Okay, what seat are you running for?
So I'm the 30th, and I'm going downtown towards Woodridge Lake, going towards Goshen Litchfield town line.
Okay.
And then the 8th district goes going towards Torrington.
Sure. Yeah,
So
that makes sense.
you're probably the 30th.
Yeah, I'm riding that line.
You're right in that line.
Yeah, and I'm on the other one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're in the 8th.
Yep.
So I live right by the highway, right, Route 8.
Okay.
So I might be as well.
For any of the listeners out there, who are paying attention to November 8th, and you're wondering, do I represent you? You can go to my website, Eva4, that's the number 4 Senate.com, and we have the list of towns and the map of where I represent.
And the person you're running against,
Harding is someone who's based from Brookfield, and he's a sitting state rep for Brookfield Bethel. But what I will say, even though I've never held a state senate seat, I've never run for this seat, I'm hitting now my 16th year behind the scenes in advocacy, 10 years in education, early education policy, so I'm not new to this.
Okay. Do you get pressure to do, you don't have to fall to the pressure, but do you get pressure to do or say or feel a way that isn't natural to you?
I am not anyone's darling for party or politics, because I always say how I feel and what's on my mind. Sure. I've always been one to be an outsider looking in, right? So in politics, things are polarized and people have very strong opinions, and I have strong opinions too. So I'm running to be beholden to the people in the community. I'm not running to be beholden to any certain entity.
Okay. And you have the ability to actually make change. I say that because we are very recently, we're getting a little bit deeper into the president. That's not an election where we can change how Torrington is going to handle education.
That's correct, yeah.
So
that's
you
correct.
are more our level.
We can change, so if on the federal level at any given point they decide to give more federal funding for infrastructure here in Connecticut, then a state senator's role is to say, we're as important as any other town, let's make sure that we're not forgotten. Sure. So then it's basically a bartering system with other legislators saying, if you want a prison in your town, I want a school in my town, or vice versa. It's trying to find that middle ground so that you get those resources to come here.
Okay. I'm going to ask a question because I'm curious. You can put it in the show or not. Do you think it's an advantage or a disadvantage, or no bearing whatsoever, that you are not a white woman? Or a white man, for that matter. Let's be honest.
I think it's a disadvantage.
You think it's a disadvantage?
I think it's a disadvantage, but I'm not one to back down from challenges.
No, I'm with you.
And I'm definitely not the candidate who screams or shouts from the top of the hill saying you have to vote for me because I'm of color. I think it's all about the talent and what the person brings in and the experience. That's what we should be voting our legislators about. Not. It's great that we have diversity and more people should get involved of any kind. And diversity is not just about color. More women, more people that identify as queer. That's great. But at the end of the day, if I'm going to vote for someone, I'm going to vote for someone because they have conviction, because I see my values in them, because I think that they're going to bring talent, because they have experience. Sure. I'm not going to vote for them just because they're a woman first. That's not how I roll.
I 100% agree. We're on a roll. I'm doing it. Tommy's like, where's he going? Oh, God, stop doing this. I got one more. Okay. Should transgender athletes who identify as the gender that they were, who are in transition or have finished transitioning, should they be able to compete in sports as the gender that they have transitioned to?
I think the key word here is transition to. And the reason why is, if we're looking at high school athletes especially, and they're going through hormonal changes, then in all tech science, again, I'm no expert here, but from what I've read and from what I know, once you've completed those hormonal changes, you're giving the child a more easier playing field with other children of who identify once in that transition. So if we're talking about an adult athlete who hasn't transitioned fully, has not gone through hormonal treatments, then it's a little harder to compare from one gender to another gender, given gender and chosen gender, because of those biological differences.
Sure.
Or
in some cases, advantages.
Advantages. I think there's several Olympic cases that highlight that, and like those transitions and the changes in your body. And I think that should be a key factor in the conversation, is transition and what's happening biologically when they're an athlete.
So once someone has completed a transition, you'd be more prone to say yes.
Absolutely.
During transition,
absolutely.
Kind of a hard no.
It's a harder thing to say, because I'm like, what does that look in a competitive field?
Sure.
So I'm married to someone who identifies as female and was a male. I'm living in that relationship, and just seeing the transitioning and the transformation. Like, we just recently had even though I've been married for 8 years and we've been together about 12 years now, literally last week we had a conversation about the changes of her body. And I pointed out that she couldn't pick up something that I knew before she could pick up, and I'm like,
really?
Yeah, the hormone. Like, it's so interesting that hormone therapy. Yeah, a whole reality living in this body, and so now in your 40s, right, you're in your 40s and you're going through hormone therapy, and now your muscle density is not the same, your speed is not the same.
Really?
Yeah, it's fascinating how the body works, and it does completely physiologically change once you go on to hormone therapy. Male, female, or female, male.
Your wife?
My wife now, wife.
When did your wife openly communicate that they were going to transition?
So during COVID, I want to say now it's been like maybe almost 2 years, and started hormone therapy about 3 years ago.
For you, I can't ask her, she's not here. For you, was this like an instant, like, I got you, like, of course? Or was this like, I'm going to need a breather?
No, for me in our relationship, when you have a loving relationship with someone that's based on communication and honesty, then you shouldn't, when you have any kind of new information thrusted, then it shouldn't be, difficult to decide that you're going to be with your partner. So for me, I knew that she was always a she. But she wasn't in a place that she felt that society was going to welcome that idea or that conversation. So I supported that, and I supported whenever was the right time to make sure that felt good for her. But for me, it wasn't ever a doubt in my mind. Maybe it's my age. I don't know. I come from a time, 90s are very different than talking about, 40s, 50s, 60s. Now we're queer is part of our vocabularies. Trans rights, having these kind of conversations, enlightening people about, how people identify, I think are really important. I guess the biggest question for me is always trying to figure out where do I fall in the spectrum of queerness, because I'm with someone who identifies as trans.
Sure.
And that's where I haven't figured that out.
Yeah. Wow. No, I hadn't even considered that.
I've been asked, like, are you a lesbian? I'm like, interesting. So I know I
now.
Yeah, I guess I am now. So I send so much love to, I guess, my queer brothers and sisters, and I think it's important that inclusivity and conversation starts with love and acceptance, and then we learn as we go.
And you didn't, you straight-faced several questions, or at least took your time to get to that point. You are not running on, I'm the face of the future.
No.
Not even,
they are younger
you
kids
never
out
dropped
there.
A hint.
There are, so many young people who are so impressive that are doing amazing things. And I think going back to, the Senate seat or any political seat, we really have to take a time and really realize who do we want to represent us. And it shouldn't be someone who's been there for 60 years.
Right.
Because, I say that with so much love, power to you for doing what you did as a legislator and holding down the fort. But times change and conversations change, and you have to be one with that change, or at least accepting of that. Because if you don't realize that the realities that we live in are completely transforming, then we're not ahead of the times. We have to legislate for the future, not for the past.
That is a wonderful way of putting it.
This is the conversation you just had earlier.
Yeah, with Jordan Richards, we had a conversation about lifetime appointed positions versus term limits. Yeah, we're with you.
Well, and my point that I brought up to him is that if you're elected to be a Supreme Court justice, appointed.
Yeah, appointed.
That's a lifetime position.
Till you die. Yep.
But he said that the judge that's leaving office now,
till 70. Yeah, it's till 70.
That she would be in office and would be forced to retire.
That's correct.
So she's deciding to step out now. And I said, there's an age limit on
here in Connecticut, but not everywhere.
Which is weird.
Yeah.
Right? Wouldn't that be a national thing, or That's something that I think.
Well, that's we talk all the time.
I think
about
we're
the beauty
having
of
that.
America.
Yeah, we're having that debate nationally. Like, where does term limits? Like, there's something to be said about being in office and knowing the ropes and understanding how it works and being you're the best leader. But there's also something to be said like you don't want to let go of this power, and then it's like,
Sure.
do you want the power or do you want to help?
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, not only that, but do you have a higher opinion of your self-worth? Because listen, like, we appreciate that you affected change while you were capable, but are you still capable after you've done this for so long and you kind of like you're pencil whipping as you go at this point? Like, have you let this position become a part of your life instead of you forcing your way in?
Yeah.
And I totally agree. Once you win this election and take this position, you will be in it for a minimum of how long?
I think I'm gonna give myself a solid 4 years.
And then
Do a good
That's
job.
how long until the next election?
No, the elections are every 2 years.
Okay.
But I know that I'm confident of doing a really good job for the next 4 years, and then let's see what happens.
Do you want to be the president one day?
No, man.
No. Okay. Hey, what would be the next step right now if you had to pick? And we're not holding you to it.
Right now I'm telling you 4 years because I know, even though I'm young, I'm also thinking about balancing that with my family. Like, I want to build a family. I was caring for a child and kind of fostering there. So we're in family planning discussions. So it's a really hard question because you're hitting me at an age that
you have no
I have a
clue
biological clock. It's like literally.
I just found out I'm a lesbian.
There's a lot happening here. So let me get through the next 2 years. But next podcast, I'll have an answer for you.
We would love to have you on.
Yeah.
We would love to have you on right before the election.
Oh, that's exciting. Okay, cool.
We could do it.
Cool.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Yeah,
guys.
thank you.
Appreciate
Pleasure.
it.
You gonna have her say good day, or?
Of course I am.
All right.
I end every podcast by saying, "Number Niners, I say good day." So you and we're going to look at the camera together. Okay. He's going to give us a count. When he throws the third finger up, that's when we know we're both going to say, "Number Niners, I say good day." That's the cadence. Number Niners, I say good day.
Okay.
You ready?
So you want me to say the whole phrase?
Whole thing.
Yes.
Okay.
Number
Niners, I say good day.
Nailed it.
Love it.
She's way better.
She did it with enthusiasm.
Pleasure,
Jeez.
guys.